Hello and welcome to this virtual session. We're glad you can join us today. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items we'd like to go over with you now. Firstly, you can resize the webinar windows to cater to your viewing preferences. You can maximise, minimise and drag the windows to your preferred viewing size. If you look at the bottom middle of your screen, you can click on the widgets that you'll need to get the most out of this virtual experience. Secondly, Microsoft specialists are on hand to answer your questions in real time. So feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A window and we'll answer them as soon as we can. Lastly, we've provided some additional resources for you to supplement your learning. You can access them by clicking on the links in this section. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers.
Welcome to this Microsoft Security Virtual Training Day, Modernize Security and Defend Against Threats. I'm Michelle Jackman, a Global Black Belt here in the Security Solution area at Microsoft. And in this course, we're going to cover 6 modules. First, we begin learning about mitigating threats using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Then we're going to move on to Module 2, where we learn about mitigating threats using Microsoft 365 Defender and Azure Defender. In Module 3, I'm handing the baton over to my highly esteemed colleague, Matt Egan, where we will learn about creating queries for Azure Sentinel using Kusto query language. Module 4 shows you how to configure your Azure Sentinel environment. And the final 2 modules will be covered by my colleague, Ren Ure. And in Module 5, we'll actually start by covering detections, performing investigations, and all this goodness in Azure Sentinel. And finally, we wrap up with performing threat hunting in Sentinel. So first, we're going to start with taking a look at how to protect against threats with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, where first we're going to look at how to deploy the environment and onboard your devices, implement Windows 10 security enhancements, manage all these alerts and incidents, perform investigations, and utilize threat and vulnerability management. So let's get started with Module 1. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is a holistic cloud-delivered endpoint security solution. It's more than just an agent, it's a platform. The capabilities include risk-based vulnerability management and assessment, which provides you that real-time visibility and helps identify ways to improve your security posture. Also, attack surface reduction, which is going to help eliminate that risky or unnecessary surface areas and restricts dangerous code from running. We also have behavior-based next-generation protection and endpoint detection and response, or EDR, which really helps you monitor that risky behavior and attacker techniques to detect and respond to those advanced attacks. We have automatic investigation and remediation and managed hunting services, along with our rich APIs for reporting and integration and a unified security management platform. This includes access to Microsoft threat experts that bring that deep knowledge and proactive threat hunting to your security operations center. So whenever we talk about practicing security administration in the context of Defender for Endpoint, we want to remember that Defender for Endpoint is a complete endpoint security solution. This offers endpoint protection, endpoint detection and response, vulnerability management, and mobile threat defense, along with that expert level threat monitoring and analysis. Whenever it comes to threat and vulnerability management, it's really all about bringing security and IT together along with threat and vulnerability management so that you can quickly discover, prioritize, and then remediate those vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. So this is great for helping you to effectively identify, assess, and then remediate your endpoint weaknesses. As you know, this is very pivotal to running a healthy security program and also reducing your organizational risk. So also when we talk about reducing attack surface reduction, we're really concentrated on a set of capabilities to provide that first line of defense in the stack by ensuring all of your configuration settings are properly set, and then applying those mitigation techniques to help out in cases of exploit. We also have next generation protection through Defender antivirus. This is built in to the operating system. It's an anti-malware solution providing your protection for desktops, laptops, and servers. We also really want to focus in on endpoint detection and response. These capabilities are advanced. So we go for the attack detections that are near real time and actionable. And security analysts can prioritize the alerts effectively based on the way that we bubble those up in the portal through you, giving you effective visibility into the full scope of a breach, and then to be able to take actions on those in a very rapid manner. Whenever comes time to actually look at investigating and remediating these alerts across multiple machines, as you know, sometimes this is very difficult for all of your SOC analysts and other employees there. So Defender for Endpoint is offering you this wide breadth of visibility on multiple machines. And then with these optics, you do get to see a large volume of alerts, but we're addressing that challenge by using automated investigation and remediation. So this reduces the number of alerts that each analyst has to look at individually. So this really streamlines the process and makes you more effective. And finally, we have access to Microsoft Threat Experts. So this is actually a new managed hunting service with Defender for Endpoint, and it provides proactive hunting, prioritization, and even additional context and insights that will further empower your analysts, your security operations centers, your SOCs to identify and respond to those threats quickly and accurately. So it's really about empowering your SOCs with our Microsoft Threat Experts. You get access to that deep knowledge, advanced threat monitoring, some additional analysis, and all the support you need to identify critical threats in your unique environment. So now let's talk about how we can deploy the Defender for Endpoint environment and the considerations that you should take into account there. So whenever you create your environment, the first thing you'll do is go to the Microsoft Defender Security Center here at https://securitycenter.windows.com. Now, when you access this site for the first time, you'll actually be guided by a wizard that will take you through some initial steps. Keep in mind that you must be a global administrator or a security administrator for the tenant on which you want to set up this environment. And on the setup preferences page, there are three settings that we can configure. And these are things that you want to consider before you get to this page because some of it cannot be changed afterwards. So when we take a look at data storage location, so you want to determine where you want your tenant to be primarily hosted. And since you cannot change this location after you set it up, and there's no way that we at Microsoft can transfer the data from the specified geolocation, be sure that you've determined that beforehand. The next setting that you can configure here in the wizard is data retention, which we default at 6 months, but you can change that to a greater or lesser amount. And then finally, the last configurable piece here is enabling preview settings. So by default, the features are turned on. You can turn those off and you can change it at any time. So those are the main considerations that we take into account when we're creating the environment. And then next, you'll need to go to the onboarding section of the Defender for Endpoint portal. So here's where we can onboard any of the supported devices. And depending on which device, what type of device, then the wizard will actually help guide you with appropriate steps and then provide some management and deployment tool options suitable for that particular device or type of device. In general, when you onboard devices to the service, you want to ensure that it meets the minimal requirements, which we have documented. And then depending on the device, you'll want to follow the configuration steps provided in the onboarding section here in the Defender for Endpoint portal. You'll want to ensure that the appropriate management tool and deployment method for your devices are used. And finally, you'll want to run a detection test to verify that the devices are properly onboarded and reporting back to the service. We have various onboarding tool options available for you and documented. So things that you might want to take into account as far as onboarding tools for your Windows machines could be a local script, a group policy. Perhaps you're looking at using Microsoft Endpoint Manager or Mobile Device Manager. It could be Endpoint Configuration Manager as well. And then for other devices, we have VDI scripts, Mac OS local scripts, Puppet, Ansible, even other mobile device management and local scripts. So lots of options there. And again, the Defender for Endpoint portal really helps you guide you through selecting what is appropriate for your type of device. So moving on to talk about access. So Defender for Endpoint uses role-based access control, and this is designed to help support your tier or role-based model of choice and gives you granular control over what roles can see, which devices they can access, and actions that they can take. The role-based access or RBAC framework is centered around the following controls. So we can control who can take specific actions. So this means that we can create custom roles and then control what Defender for Endpoint capabilities they can access. And we can do this at a very granular level. Then the second control that we take into account is controlling who can see information on a specific device group or groups. So this means that we can create device groups by specific criteria. This could be stuff such as names, tags, domains, and then we can grant role access to these individuals by using specific Azure Active Directory user groups. This also means we can implement role-based access by defining admin roles, assigning corresponding permissions, and then assigning Azure AD user groups to those roles. Now, keep in mind, before enabling this feature, it's important that you have Global Administrator role or the Security Administrator role in Azure AD, and that you have your Azure AD groups ready to go. This helps reduce your risk of being locked out of the portal. Initially, it's important also to keep in mind that only those individuals with Azure AD Global Administrator or those security administrator rights that I just mentioned will be able to create and assign roles in Microsoft Defender Security Center. So therefore, be sure you have all those groups ready in Azure AD, and then you can work to assign other users to the roles that they need to be able to perform appropriate actions. So now we'll move on to talking about Windows 10 security enhancements and how to implement those. Whenever we talk about attack surface reduction and how to apply those in a Windows 10 environment, then we're talking about, hey, how do we harden these places where a threat actor is likely to attack? And if you're a security analyst or you're looking at, how does this affect the members in my SOC, then you really want to understand it from that perspective of what are the protection options and what are the protection recommendations. And when you're performing these alert investigations, you should really think about all of the events generated by the attack surface reduction on the host, which could provide forensics evidence. In this case, we have several items and strategies that we can take into account for attack surface reduction and its components. So we want to Number one, reduce vulnerabilities. So that's your attack surfaces in your applications and on your devices. We have intelligent rules that really help stop malware with Defender antivirus. We've got hardware-based isolation. So this is all about protecting and maintaining the integrity of your system as it starts and while it's running. So we want to validate system integrity through both local and remote attestation. And we can also use container isolation for Microsoft Edge to help guard against malicious websites in this case. We can also use application control so that our applications must earn trust in order to run. Further, we can help protect our operating systems and apps that are in use within our organization from being exploited. We can do this with our exploit protection. This works also not only with our own solutions, but also with third-party antivirus solutions. So that's a really important point and something to keep in mind depending on what you're using at your organization. We have capabilities around web protection, really all about securing your devices against those web threats out there to help you regulate unwanted content, and controlled folder access. So we want to prevent malicious or suspicious applications, including those file encrypting ransomware malware, from making changes to files in our key system folders. This does also require Microsoft Defender antivirus. And then we can look at the network firewall to prevent unauthorized traffic from flowing to and from our organization's devices. And we have two-way traffic filtering for the network, which is really handy and capable in this aspect. And then finally, network protection to really extend that protection to your network traffic and connectivity on your organization's devices. And this also requires Defender antivirus as part of the solution. So if we want to look at enabling some of these attack surface reduction rules and some of those capabilities that we just discussed, then remember, your attack surface includes all of the places where an attacker could compromise your organization's devices or networks. So reducing your attack surface means not only protecting your organization's devices, but also the network. And this helps with leaving attackers actually fewer ways to perform attacks. So the rules themselves can target certain software behaviors, especially ones that we find are often abused by attackers. Some of these behaviors include stuff like launching executable files and scripts that attempt to download or run files, performing behaviors that applications don't usually initiate during the normal day-to-day work, even running hidden or otherwise suspicious scripts. And so we have various options when we go to enable the attack surface reduction rules in Defender for Endpoint. Some sample rules might be blocking Office applications from injecting code into other processes. And then we have various rule options that we can apply. So whether it's, hey, we want to disable this, or we want to block it, or we simply want to log it with an audit. So we have, the different options here listed on the slide of 0, 1, and 2 for disable, block, and audit respectively. And then there are various ways that we can deploy these rules. So if you're using the Microsoft platform, we have options with Intune, Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, MDM, and even group policy. So now that we have it all configured, our attack surface reduction rules in place, then we will want to start learning how to manage all these alerts and incidents that we're going to receive now that our devices are onboarded and configured. So I want to explain a little bit more about security operations in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So Defender for Endpoint is inspired by the assume breach mindset. It's continuously collecting behavioral cyber telemetry. This includes process information, network activities, deep optics into the kernel and memory manager, user login activities, registry and file system changes, and tons more. The information is then stored for 6 months by default, and this enables your analyst to essentially travel back in time to the start of an attack. And then the analyst can pivot in various ways throughout different views, and then approach the investigation through multiple vectors. The EDR, the endpoint detection and response capabilities that we have with Defender for Endpoint, provide advanced attack detections that are near real time and actionable. So this is great for your security analysts so that they can prioritize the alerts effectively, get that visibility into the full scope of the breach, and take response actions to remediate the threats. Whenever a threat is detected, alerts are created in the system for the analyst to investigate. And then alerts with the same attack techniques or that can be attributed to the same attacker are aggregated into an entity that we call an incident. So aggregating alerts in this manner is, in essence, making it much easier for your analysts to collectively investigate and respond to these threats. So what these response capabilities are doing is giving you the power to promptly remediate all of these threats by acting on the affected entities. So next, let's talk more about how we actually manage and investigate the incidents themselves now that we've learned a little bit about what makes up an incident from our various alerts. So as you know, managing incidents is one of the most important parts of every cybersecurity operation. For Defender for Endpoint and in the Microsoft Defender Security Center, we can manage incidents here in the portal by going to the incidents queue or the incidents management pane. We'll see incidents that might affect our network. We can be able to understand what they mean and then collate evidence from across the telemetry points to resolve them. When you go to investigate an incident, you'll see additional details. You'll see the actual the story, the actual details that we see within the incident, any comments and actions that have been taken so far by other analysts in your organization. We'll have various tabs such as the graph, the evidence, the investigations, and the devices. So we can, we'll actually take a look at these later in our demo portion, but this just gives you a quick intro into what managing and investigating the incidents look like. So then whenever we want to look a little bit more closely into the incident management, we can also manage and investigate the alerts. So if we want to investigate the alerts to see how they were linked together into an incident, then all we have to do is go to the alerts queue. We'll find that the alerts are grouped into incidents based on the following reasons. So it was an automated investigation. We'll find that the investigation triggered this linked alert while investigating an original alert. Another reason would be file characteristics. So if we see that there are some files from an alert that have similar characteristics, then those will be grouped into an incident. Another grouping criteria is around manual association. So you, as the SOC analyst, could manually link the alerts based on your investigation, which is, a very handy feature. Next, it would be proximate time. So if the alerts were triggered on the same device within a certain time frame, then we'll find that they get grouped together in an incident. Some other criteria would be whether it's the same URL or the same file that triggered the alert. So lots of good reasons why we would link those alerts into an incident, which is helpful for you to understand. And then you can even update the incident management information from the alerts queue directly, viewing the related information, going to different pages to help in your investigation, seeing, details down to the techniques and category used. So let's talk a little bit more about what we do with this. How do we perform device investigations now that we've had some alerts and we see that a device has been affected? We can do this by going to the device inventory page. It shows us a list, as you can see here, of all the devices in your network where these alerts were generated. So by default, the queue is displaying devices with alerts seen in the last 30 days, as you can see here on this screenshot. If you want, you can select a device from the device list itself, and it will open up the page for that device. There's also various other ways to access the device page, such as through the incidents or alerts pages that we previously saw. At a glance here, you can see, we'll see all kinds of information. We've got the domain, the risk level, whether it's high, medium, or low. We've got the OS platform. So in this case, we're looking at all Windows 10 devices. And then other details for easy identification of which devices are at most risk. During the onboarding process that we reviewed earlier, the devices list is gradually populated with devices as they come on board and as they begin to report sensor data. This view is great for you to track your onboarded endpoints as they come online, or once they're all there, you can download the complete endpoint list for offline analysis, and you can do this in CSV format, for example. So you can also investigate the devices that are part of or related to a given incident. If you click on the affected device, whenever you see that device in the portal, you can open a detailed report about that device. Devices are identified in the following areas. In that devices list that we saw previously, and the alerts queue, which we also have looked at, and in the security operations dashboard, which we'll take a look at in our demo. You'll see also, if you are doing an investigation, you'll see other ways to pivot into the device, perhaps in the individual alert, or if you're looking at a domain or IP address view and there is an affected device. So whenever you do choose to investigate a device, you'll see details. You'll see the response actions, details about the device itself, tags, security info, exposure level. You'll see response actions. We have our various tabs across the top here with our overview, our alerts, the timeline, security recommendations, software inventory, any missing KBs, and discovered vulnerabilities. So this is great, easy to access information. We also here have various cards within the devices list, which is going to show you the active alerts that are currently active for that device, any logged on users, how many there are, and then the security assessment for that device. So lots of good details here when you're doing the device investigation, and there's even a link here for you to download the full investigation package on a device, which can be really handy. So now that we've investigated this device, we'll talk about how to perform actions on it as needed. So this might be stuff such as collecting data or remotely accessing the machine. You can also isolate the device. So what this feature does is allow you to disconnect that compromised device from the network while retaining connectivity to the Defender for Endpoint service. So that continues to monitor the device, so you continue to have data for use in your threat hunting and investigation. Now, depending on the severity of the attack and the sensitivity of the device itself, you might want to isolate the device from the network completely. What this does help with is preventing the attacker from controlling the compromised device any further, and really preventing them from doing any further data exfiltration or lateral movement across your network. You can also perform other device actions, such as restricting app execution. So in addition to containing the attack by stopping malicious processes, you can lock down the device and prevent subsequent attempts of other potentially malicious programs from running. Another containment action here is running an antivirus scan, which is pretty straightforward here. So next, you can also do other device actions, such as the investigation actions that we have listed here. So you can start a new general purpose automated investigation on the device as needed. And while it's running, any other alert generated from the device will be added to this automated investigation until it's completed. In addition, if that same threat is seen on other devices, then those devices are automatically added to the automated investigation. Secondly, we can take a look at collecting investigation packages. So again, this is just a link on the device action page itself, which lets you download that and use in your investigation and hunting. And the last investigation action that we'll mention here is initiating the live response session. So live response is a really cool capability that gives you instantaneous access to a device using a remote shell connection. This gives you really great power to do in-depth investigative work and then take super quick response actions to promptly contain identified threats in real time, really. So live response is designed to enhance your investigations as a SOC analyst by enabling you to collect all of that forensic data, run scripts on the devices, and send suspicious entities for analysis, directly remediate threats, and do proactive hunting for emerging threats. And you can get a ton of information on the actions that were taken on a device from the Action Center in Microsoft Security Center. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into collecting investigation packages from the devices. So as we mentioned just in the previous slide, as part of the investigation or response process, you can collect an investigation package from the device. So by collecting this investigation package, it lets you identify the current state of the device and to further understand the tools and techniques used by the attacker. So to download that package, which is just a zip file, by the way, and to investigate those events that occurred on your device, all you need to do is on that device page, select Collect Investigation Package. There will be a row of response actions at the top of that device page. You can specify why you want to do that, so it's documented, and then download it. Alternatively, you can do this directly from the Action Center and select the package collection that way. So there are so much pieces of information and data that you get from the investigation. So we're going to have folders around users and groups, the services, scheduled tasks, processes, and installed programs, just to mention a few. So now that we've collected the investigation package from the devices and learned a little bit more about what actions we can take on a device. We'll move on to talking about performing the evidence and entities investigations beyond the device investigations. So we can investigate the details of a file associated with a specific alert, behavior, or event, and really determine if this file itself exhibits any malicious activities, or perhaps we can use it to identify the attack motivation and maybe even understand the potential scope of the breach. So whenever we're in the incident splash screen itself and we're looking at the file by clicking on the file page, then we will get the file details. We will get the alerts that are associated with that file, where else it's been observed in the organization. We can submit it for deep analysis and see what other names that the file might have been called for the exact same file that has been found in our organization. We can also investigate user accounts. So identifying user accounts with the most active alerts. This is displayed, by the way, in the dashboard as users at risk. We can investigate cases of potential compromised credentials or pivot on the associated user account when investigating an alert or one of these devices. This can help us identify possible lateral movement between devices using that user account. There's various views within the portal that we can find user account information. This will be on the main dashboard, within that alert queue, or in the device details page itself. Whenever you're in any of these views, you will actually see a clickable link for the user account that will take you directly to the user account details page. And there you will find lots and lots of details about the user account. You'll see, again, the Defender for Identity alerts that are related to that user account, which devices are logged onto with that account, the role that the user account has, the logon type, and even more details. You can see alerts related to this specific user account in the user details pane. And again, you will get alerts with links to files or to the user, and integrated with Defender for Identity. These features really are related to the user. So keep in mind that you do need to enable that integration on both Defender for Identity and Defender for Endpoint to use this feature that I'm mentioning here. And if you are a Defender for Endpoint, it's a real easy integration to enable. You simply enable it in those advanced features. So let's talk about what we do with threat and vulnerability management capabilities within Defender for Endpoint. So the software inventory in threat and vulnerability management is a whole list of known software in your organization with official common platform enumerations, or CPEs. So software products without an official CPE do not have vulnerabilities published, so those will not display here. The software inventory page also includes details such as the name of the vendor, the number of weaknesses, the threats associated with it, and the number of exposed devices. So if you're wondering how this works, what we do when we're out there in the field of discovery is we're leveraging the same set of signals that is responsible for detection and vulnerability assessment in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint detection and response capabilities. And what's great is it's real time. So just in a matter of minutes, you will see the vulnerability information as soon as they're discovered. This engine is automatically grabbing information from multiple security feeds. And in fact, if you see a particular software is connected to a live threat campaign, you'll get an immediate link to the threat analytics report as soon as that's available. The software inventory page, whenever you do open it, you'll see it with that list of software that's installed in your network next to some of those details that we mentioned previously, but also along with exposed devices and exposed threats, any weaknesses found, impact to your exposure score, and also some tags. You can even filter this list here based on weaknesses found in the software, maybe threats associated with them, and then those tags, like whether the software has reached end of support, for example. We also have the weaknesses page that is part of the threat and vulnerability management. So the weaknesses page is listing all of those software vulnerabilities within your devices and listing out those common vulnerabilities and exposures to CVEs by ID. So you can view the severity, the CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System rating, how prevalent it is in your organization, if there is one, the corresponding breach, any threat insights that we have about it, and much more. So moving on to talk about the event timeline. So this is a cool risk news feed that helps you with really interpreting how risk is introduced into your organization based on your organization's risk. So basically, you can find new vulnerabilities that were introduced, vulnerabilities that became exploitable, any exploit that was added to an exploit kit, and then we'll tell you the story of your exposure score and the Microsoft Secure score for your devices. And then you can determine the cause and the risk of large changes. And as you know, these different events can impact your devices or your score for your devices. So it's really kind of about reducing your exposure by addressing what needs to be remediated based on those prioritized recommendations. So lastly here, we have the vulnerable devices report. There's going to be 2 columns in this report, along with some really great visual graphs and bar charts. We're going to show you trends over time. This can be broken down by the past 30 days, the past 3 months, 6 months, or a custom date range of whatever you need to see, or even today if you just need to see current information. And then you can also keep in mind that you can filter this, right? So do you want to look at it based on the vulnerability severity level? Do you want to look at it if the exploit is available? Do you want to look at it by the operating system platform, et cetera, et cetera? So you can filter that. There's also the option of drilling down. So if there's some insight that you want to explore further, then you would just select that bar chart that you're interested in, and then it'll show just that filter list of devices that you're interested in. And you can even export the list from there. Finally, you have security level graphs here. So each device, just so you know, is only counted once according to the most severe vulnerability found on that device. So very, very handy insights there for exploring the vulnerabilities on your devices. So now we'll move on to talking about tracking emerging threats with threat analytics. So as you all know, the threat landscape and our adversaries are getting more and more sophisticated. We're seeing new threats emerging frequently and prevalently, and so we've all figured out that it's so critical to be able to quickly assess the impact of new threats. We also want to be able to review our resilience against or exposure to these threats, and then think about hey, what actions can I take to stop or contain these threats? So the threat analytics set of reports from our expert Microsoft security researchers cover the most relevant threats. So this is going to be stuff like active threat actors in their campaigns, prevalent malware, common attack surfaces, critical vulnerabilities, and some of those popular and new attack techniques. Here's an example report, but each of the reports will give you a detailed analysis of a threat and then very extensive guidance on how to defend against the threat. It also incorporates data from your network, indicating whether the threat is active and if you have applicable protections in place. The threat analytics dashboard here itself is a really great jumping off point for getting to the reports that are most relevant to your organization. So you're going to see threats summarized basically in several sections, such as devices with alerts over time to show the number of distinct devices with both active and resolved alerts over time. The number of resolved alerts here will indicate how quickly your organization responds to alerts associated with a threat. And then it will show you the number of alerts resolved within a certain amount of days. Next, we'll also see a threat summary. So what's the overall impact of tracked threats? And we'll see the number of threats with active and resolved alerts. In addition to this, we'll also see those high impact threats, listing the threats that have had the highest impact to the organization. They're actually ranked by the number of devices that have active users on them. Another important topic that we'll see covered here is your own security resilience and posture. So you get this report that shows charts that show an overview of how resilient your organization is against any given threat that you select to run the report on. And then another cool one that's very easy to access from here is the vulnerability patching status. So what an easy way to see all the number of devices that have applied security updates or patches that address these vulnerabilities exploited by a specific threat that you're looking into. And there's much more here as well, which we'll take a look at when we're in our demo. So that's all we're going to cover as far as content. So we're going to move over to this demo now and look at how to mitigate threats for using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So I'll be moving over to my demo system now. So we're going to take a look at a document dropping a backdoor on a device. And so we'll walk through this scenario. As you know, attacks that introduce file-based malware using socially engineered email are quite common. And so recipients are tricked into launching a backdoor that gives attackers control over what is now a compromised device. So in this scenario, what we're going to do is simulate an attack on one of these test devices that I've onboarded to Defender for Endpoint. And then we'll take a look a little bit more about how it detects the attack and then enables us to promptly investigate and respond to it. So we'll actually download a socially engineered lure document, which would typically be sent probably in a spear phishing email. And it's designed so that the unwitting user opens it and doesn't suspect a thing. In this case, the document will be weaponized with a crafted macro code. This will silently drop and load an executable file onto the device. We are using a simulated document here, so in our case of the demo, it is a benign executable, but it is behaving as if it's a backdoor attempting to gain persistence. It writes to a registry run key and creates a scheduled task, and which are both commonly known auto start extensibility points, or ASAPs, ASEPs. So whenever we get the ASAPs created, then the attack simulation itself will end. But as you know, in the real world, the attacker will actually then use the implanted backdoor to perform other actions within the compromised network, maybe moving laterally to other devices or gathering credentials to gain privileges and exfiltrating stolen data. So be sure that whenever you go to run the simulation yourself, that you've already onboarded Defender for Endpoint, that you have a machine running Windows 10 Anniversary Update version 1607 or later. Turn on PowerShell, turn on Defender Antivirus, and have Microsoft Word installed. So I've logged in here to the Defender for Endpoint portal at Microsoft Defender Security Center as an admin. Now I'm going to I've expanded the menu here. Evaluations and Tutorials blade. Click on Simulations and Tutorials. So for the case of this scenario, I've downloaded this simulation file here. And once I've copied this to my test device, in this case, I'm going to simulate typical user interaction and load this up. So let's take a look. Okay, so now to simulate typical user interaction with this Lure document that I may have received via a phishing email, I'm just going to double click on the document. So I've been prompted for a password, so let me get that entered. Okay, now that we have it open, I'm going to enable editing because I want to ignore all of these warnings about being safe and everything, because I really believe this is a document I need to open and it's safe. So I've been enabled in editing, and now I want to enable these macros so that we can run this simulation. So you might even find that your organization blocks macros from documents from the internet. So in this case, you can do this by clicking Enable Content, which works for me, but you might encounter difficulties in your own scenario when you're running it, especially if you have any third-party security products running. So I've run the scenario. I may be prompted, do I want to run it? And I can click OK. We see that the file itself is copied to the desktop. So we see this WinATP intro backdoor .executable. So this is representing that backdoor. And again, the PowerShell script that we launched when we enabled the macros on the Word document actually copied this executable onto the desktop. And then what the script does is it goes on to create a scheduled task to launch the backdoor at a predefined time. This is typically used for stealth, and it's harder to trace back to the document itself. And when this backdoor itself is launched, it's creating an auto start entry under the registry run key. So that allows it to stay persistent. It's starting automatically every time Windows starts. So we saw the command prompt where it indicated that the backdoor is running, and then we can simply end it now. And so now we've actually just finished the simulation itself. So we were the attacker. We were successful in getting the user to click on it and launch it and copy it over to our machines. So now we're going to switch roles from the analyst perspective and review and investigate those Defender for Endpoint alerts that surface from this attack. Note that in your own environment, if you're running this demo, it may take a while for the alerts to appear, maybe 15 to 30 minutes after the simulated backdoor is launched. I have those up here now. So we're going to switch again, as I said, to that Defender role and explore the attack from the SOC point of view. So I've opened the Defender for Endpoint portal. logged in with my credentials, in this case, a global admin that was provided with me whenever I created the environment in the prerequisite steps. And then I'll go to dashboards and security operations. So you can see we have a bunch of new alerts here. So the Defender for Endpoint processes here are applying correlation analytics and then aggregating all of those related alerts and investigations into one incident entity, like we learned in the course materials earlier. So what this is doing is narrating a broader attack story, allowing you as the SOC analyst to understand and deal with all those complex threats across the attack story. So we'll click over on the incidents panel, and as you know, the alerts generated during the simulation are associated with the same threat, so they're automatically aggregated into that single incident. And if we click here on the incident, then I will see this side panel with a bunch of relevant details, stuff like which alerts were a part of this incident, what the classification and categories are, when I first saw the activity around it. And then from here, I can click on Open Incident Page if I want to see more information about this specific incident. So from this incident page, I can check all of the affected devices and the related alerts. For a broader view of the entities involved in the attack, I can click on Graph. This will give a really cool visual that really lets you review the incident and alert list as the attack progression unfolded. Now we can take a look at the individual alerts as needed to really understand what was going on. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these alerts generated during this attack. So we'll just walk through a few of them, and depending on what you're running when you go to run your demo, you may see more or different alerts or in a different order. So nothing to be worried about there. So let's take a look at PowerShell dropped a suspicious file on the machine. So I'm just going to click on this to pull up the details. So as we talked about, the macro in that Word document, that Lure document that we copied to our device, used PowerShell to write an executable, which we saw copied to our desktop there. And so what Defender for Endpoint is doing is it's monitoring all these executables created by Office applications, including those executables dropped by PowerShell. So it looks for files that are rare relative to your organization or to everyone else. Now on this alerts tab within the incident, we came to PowerShell dropped a suspicious file on the machine because we want to look at that specific alert. So we have it in focus. And so now the story down here that we're showing is focused in on which alert that we selected. So this alert story contains all different entities related to the alert. These might include files, process command lines, events, related alerts, and any other details and actions that we have available. We also can see impacted assets and health state, and also have the ability to restrict or isolate the entity involved. In this details pane, we can see pivot places to the timeline. We can see details on the alert and the detection sources. We can see recommendations, what the details on the automated investigation so far are, and even take actions to assign or link to another incident. Now let's take a closer look at this file itself that was created. So right here under File Create, I'm going to click on the winatp-intro-backdoor.exe file so I can get some more details. So over here in the alert story, I clicked on the file, and now over here on the details page, I'm going to see some more context about it. So this is going to give me stuff like the size of the file, the hashes, the virus total summary, and more. And then we can even add an indicator from here or download it directly if we need it for further investigation. So let's inspect the file a little further. I'm going to open the file page there directly from the details pane. So if I want to see some additional detailed info about the file, so we could see from the details pane some of the same information, but now we have everything else that we know about it. So we have the hashes, we have the file size, we have the alerts raised on this file, we have the number of devices that were where it was observed, both in the organization and worldwide. We can download the file from here. We can add an indicator like we could on the details page as well. And we can also, stop and quarantine the file right from here. If you're subscribing to the Managed Hunting service, you can consult a threat expert directly from this page as well. We mentioned deep analysis before, so if you do have a need to perform further forensics on the file itself, you can submit it for deep analysis to provide that automated analysis in a controlled environment. And so I submitted that earlier so that you can see the results here. So we see stuff like the behaviors, different communications, environment awareness, what exactly is going on in each of those behaviors. Observable, so where we saw which IPs it contacted and which other files were dropped. So some really good details here when investigating the file. And you can also download the file directly from here as needed. So now let's go back to reviewing some more alerts and see what other cool stuff we can find. So I'm just going to click back here in the breadcrumb chain here to my multi-stage incident with all of my alerts into it. So we looked at it as a complete incident, and then we started looking at some of the generated alerts. So far we've looked at PowerShell dropped a suspicious file on the device. So let's look at some more of these PowerShell ones. So let's look at suspicious PowerShell command line. So just any of these will do. So what we actually saw in this simulation is that the PowerShell invocation pattern used in this macro exhibited traits indicating stealth and intent to evade detection. So that actually in and of itself, to remain stealthy, triggered this alert that we just are viewing now. So this alert shows us more information about the PowerShell execution itself, including the full command line arguments and the base64 encoded script that was executed. So this is all really good detailed information. Again, we have the ability to manage the alert here directly from the details pane, such as seeing it in the timeline, getting more of that story, looking which incidents it's linked to, how it was discovered, what our recommendations are, and those other options that we've seen in the previous looks at alerts. Now I'd like to take a look at a couple more of these. So how about we take a look at an anomalous scheduled task was created. So this was very key for the simulated attack. It's a very commonly used technique for attackers to use scheduled task as a persistence technique. These can be used for other purposes too, maybe to delay the next phases of an attack, remain quiet and stealthy in the process entailed in. But regardless of how the scheduled task is used, Defender for Endpoint is going to detect those anomalous scheduled tasks. And this includes the ones that are rare and not seen elsewhere in your organization and in the world. So we get alerts about it. So we saw one here. By clicking on it, now we have this alert in focus. So the parts of the story shown to us are relevant to the anomalous scheduled task created. So we see lots of good details here. Again, we can classify it as a true or false. We can set the classification if we've already looked at this alert. Is it in progress? Have we already resolved this? Maybe this is a duplicate one. And then again, being able to classify as true or false, because it's really good to feed back that true and false positive data so that it gets smarter and smarter so that your SOC analyst wastes less and less time. So I can click directly on the device name from any of these alert or incident pages to open the device details page. So over here, I can see the Win1 details. So we see the alert itself, the risk level, the exposure level, and any related events to the device itself. So I'm actually going to open this device page just rather quickly to show you what else you might take into consideration in real life. So you can click on the timeline to see the timeline of events that occurred for this device and the alerts and incidents there, and really see some useful details such as the process trees and file creation relationships and such behaviors. If there are any incidents on the devices, you can resolve them directly from here. And then finally, whenever you're all done with your investigation, review the incidents, the alerts, the file details, the device details, really have seen what was affected and what's correlated, then you might also take one more look at the reports dashboard. This will give you some great high-level information about all of the alerts and devices related to your organization. You're going to get those trends and summaries that we mentioned in the course content. And as you know, these trends and summaries related to all the different alerts and devices in your organization can really help you identify where you need to focus. So for example, if you see a sudden spike in a specific kind of alert, you can drill down, start investigating directly from that relevant card within the reporting dashboard and pivot into the alert or device of interest, including being able to filter and determine what action to take next. So we've just simulated a very common attack and then walked through how Defender for Endpoint surfaces that attack. We saw what the alerts look like and the detailed contextual file, device, and event information provided with each of those alerts. So I hope you enjoyed this demo, and thank you. So this concludes Module 1, where we learned about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is our holistic cloud-delivered endpoint security solution with capabilities such as attack surface reduction and threat and vulnerability management. We learned how to ready the environment for Defender for Endpoint, perform investigations, and manage all those alerts and incidents. So now we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll start back with Module 2, which is mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender and Azure Defender. Welcome back from the break, everybody. Next, we'll move on to Module 2, where we're going to take a look at how to mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender along with Azure Defender, including how to protect your identities with Azure AD Identity Protection and remediating risks with Defender for Office 365, how to plan for cloud workload protections using Azure Defender. So let's get started with Module 2. As threats become more complex and persistent, alerts increase and our security teams are overwhelmed. So with Microsoft 365 Defender, which is part of Microsoft's XDR solution, we're leveraging that Microsoft 365 security portfolio to automatically analyze the threat data across domains, building a complete picture of each attack in a single dashboard. With this breadth and depth of clarity, your defenders, your SOC analysts, and such can now focus on critical threats and hunt for sophisticated breaches, trusting that the powerful automation in Microsoft 365 Defender detects and stops attacks anywhere in the kill chain and returning your organization to a secure state. So the idea here is to stop attacks before they happen by reducing your attack surface and eliminating those persistent threats. Detect and automate across your domains by integrating that threat data for rapid and complete response. And thirdly, to hunt across all your data. So leverage that time saved to apply your unique expertise. The Microsoft 365 Defender is a unified pre- and post-breach enterprise defense suite that natively coordinates detection, prevention, investigation, and response across endpoints, identities, email, applications, and everything that we've listed here on this slide with endpoint, email, apps, and identity to provide that integrated protection against all your sophisticated attacks. With this integrated solution, your security professionals can stitch together the threat signals that each of these products receive and then determine the full scope and impact of the threat, how it entered the environment, what's affected, and how it's currently impacting your organization. Microsoft 365 Defender is taking that automatic action to prevent or stop the attack and self-heal affected mailboxes, endpoints, and user identities. So that's a quick introduction to the threat protection within Microsoft 365 Defender. So let's keep diving a little deeper into the capabilities. Now, you know that users face multiple threats, from credential theft to malware to phishing to infrastructure attacks. When we think about credential theft, we have examples such as password spray or breach harvesting or the ever popular Mimikatz. With malware, we have viruses, ransomware, and the like. We all know that phishing is very prevalent, and this is going to, mean access to users' computer and credentials often, while the infrastructure attacks themselves include all of these virtual machines and your resources that might be in Azure that are improperly secured or misconfigured. What we see is that targeted attacks usually follow a timeline similar to what we here have on the slide. So the attackers will do a lot of research first. So maybe using social media or open source intelligence sources or even data from their own previous attacks. They'll do a lot of research and start preparing for the attack. Then they'll look at, attacking with elevation of privilege. So this is typically using credential theft, but you might also see abuse of administrative and management tools and taking advantage of those configuration weaknesses. Next, we see attackers typically extracting data for illicit purposes. They often go undetected for 200 plus days. Now, this is just a general observation based on our own incident response team's experience, which is similar to others reported in the security industry. But as you know, precise numbers are very difficult to produce because evidence of those initial patient zero hosts are frequently lost after such long periods of time. Moving on to talking about how we mitigate these incidents using Microsoft 365 Defender. So the 365 Defender portal will provide a cross-domain view showing you threat correlation and purpose-driven alerts to investigate those threats. The individual alerts themselves provide some very valuable clues about an ongoing attack. But attacks typically employ various vectors and various techniques to carry out a breach. So piecing those individual clues together can both be challenging or even nearly impossible and time-consuming. So whenever we see an incident within Microsoft 365 Defender, we're actually looking at a correlation of collected alerts and associated data that make up this entire story of an attack. The Microsoft 365 services and applications create alerts when they detect something suspicious or malicious, whether this is an event or an activity. And then the individual alerts themselves give you the details and maybe, hey, here's the different type of techniques that were used against your different entities, which devices, which users and mailboxes. And we'll get all kinds of details. As you can see here on the screen, we've given an example like we've seen before in our Defender for Endpoint modules, where we can see here's an actual incident, here's the details of it. By grouping the alerts into an incident, we're getting the details such as where the attack started, how far the attack has gone into your tenant, which tactics were used, the scope of the attack, how many mailboxes were impacted, for example. And then all of this other associated detail that we can see, for example, here on the incident details page. Now, if you enable it, you can also utilize the automatic investigation and resolution of your alerts. In Microsoft 365 Defender, it is an option to enable this, and we're using our artificial intelligence to help perform those actions. But you can also perform additional remediation steps to resolve the attack manually if you'd like. So let's take a look a little bit more at investigating these incidents that we've found in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. So as we've mentioned before, all of the alerts, assets, investigation, and evidence are aggregated together from across your devices, your users, and your mailboxes into a single incident that lets you have that comprehensive look into the breadth of an attack. So within an incident itself, you can analyze all of the alerts that affect your network, understand what they mean, and collate the evidence so that you can devise an effective remediation plan. If we take a look at the incident page, we'll get information and links to the alerts, devices, users, mailboxes, the investigations, and the evidence. When we take a look at the device tab, for example, we're going to get all of the devices related to that specific incident. If we want to look at the overall summary and property of the incident, then we can look at the initial investigation of the incident overview. We'll get key information such as the severity, to whom it's assigned, if it's been assigned yet, and the minor attack categories for that specific incident. For users, we're going to see which ones we've identified to be part of of this specific incident. We can, from here, click on the username to navigate to that actual user's Cloud App Security page, where we can then conduct further investigation and review threat information, including current incidents for that user, any active alerts for that user, as well as risk level for that user. We can check user exposure, accounts, and devices, and tons more. And just like with many of the other areas, we can directly take action from the user view for any compromised user. And actually, we can even confirm if the user is compromised or require them to sign in again as a protective measure. For mailboxes, we're going to see which ones we've identified to be part of this investigation. We can select the alert that's specific to the mail portion of the incident and launch into Microsoft Defender for Office 365, where we can take these remediation actions and view additional details. So if we want to view a little bit more into the investigations and see the automated investigations triggered by the alerts in this incident, then we can go to the investigations panel. This allows us to perform remediation actions or wait for other analysts' approval of actions. And that all depends on how we've configured automated investigations to run in the Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Office 365. To view additional details and get the full information on it, you can navigate to the actual details page for an investigation, and you'll see if there are any pending actions there for you to approve. Finally, we have the evidence. So Microsoft 365 Defender automatically investigates all of the incidents supported and then provides you with auto response and information as part of the investigation. So this would include important files, processes, services, emails, and more. The purpose of this is to help you quickly detect and block potential threats in an incident. So each of these analyzed entities will be marked with a verdict, whether that's malicious, suspicious, or clean, and then a remediation status. This is just simply to help you understand the remediation status of the entire incident and the next steps to further remediate. So now we'll take a look at using the Action Center within Security Center to take actions on devices and mailboxes. You can use the Action Center to see the results of both current and past investigations across your entire organization's devices and mailboxes. So depending on the type of threat and resulting verdict, then the remediation actions can occur automatically or upon approval by your organization's security operations team. All of the remediation actions, whether they're pending approval or already approved, are consolidated in the Action Center. So you're going to get that single pane of glass experience for tasks such as approving those pending remediation actions, viewing an audit log of already approved remediation actions, reviewing completed remediation actions, and then your security operations team can operate more effectively and efficiently because you can have that comprehensive view of Microsoft 365 Center alerts and everything. So you'll see two tabs. As we can see on this slide here, we have pending and history. The pending tab is going to list all of those investigations that require review and approval by someone in your security organization. So make sure to review those from time to time so that you can take action on any of the pending ones that you see. Then that history tab is great for viewing past investigations and remediation actions that were taken automatically. You can view data filtered by the past day, week, month, or even 6 months. And then if you want to see more details about a specific item, you can click on it and you'll see the investigation details view that we've often seen before in our other slides and demos. So some of the actions you can take from here would be the ability to quarantine a file, restrict code execution, or even isolate a device. So now that we've talked a little bit more about Microsoft 365 Defender and the Action Center here, we'll move into protecting your identities with Azure AD Identity Protection. In Azure AD Identity Protection, there are two different ways to detect and handle identity risks. The first is self-remediation workflow, and the second is administrator remediation workflow. So let's talk a little bit more about the self-remediation workflow and what that looks like. Identity protection uses risk policies to automatically respond to detected threats for you. All you do is configure the risk policy to decide how you want identity protection to respond to a particular type of risk. You then choose the action the user is asked to complete. This action could be a self-service password reset or a multi-factor authentication enforcement. Using policies in this way helps save time and gives you peace of mind. In the workflow that we have here, the administrator first configures those risk policies that we mentioned. Those then monitor for identity risks. When a risk is detected, the policies enforce measures to remediate it. For example, in the case of this, we're saying, hey, a password reset is required. So we prompt the user to do this in response to a risk detected. Then the user gets notified, resets their password, and the risk is remediated. We can also have admins decide how a risk should be remediated when it's been detected by your risk policies. So in this administrator remediation workflow, we're helping you make more tailored decisions. The admin probably understands the context in which the risks were detected a little more than we can from an automated perspective. So in the example workflow here for the administrator, the admin is configuring the risk policies. Those risk policies are monitoring for identity risks. If we detect one, the admin gets notified of a risk in a report. So those reports are auto-generated whenever risks are detected. The admin gets the notification. The admin can then review the detailed report and decide which appropriate actions to take to remediate the risks. So for example, in this case, the admin might decide the sign-in is safe and accepts the risk. So let's talk a little bit more about risk policies that we're using to configure these and to detect the risk and alert on them. So what exactly is a risk policy? Well, in the context of Azure AD Identity Protection, a risk policy helps decide how you want the identity protection service to respond to a particular type of risk. Do you want to block or allow access? Do you want to make users go through additional authentication before you allow access? Risk policies help you respond to risk rapidly. Then your organization can leverage these different risk policies, avoid hiring external contractors, for example, to handle all of these identity-based risks. You can apply different risk policies based on the type of identity risk, and you can use either a sign-in risk policy, as we see here, or a user risk policy. The sign-in risk policy scrutinizes every single sign-in and then gives a risk score for each of those sign-ins. The score is indicating the probability that the sign-in was attempted by the person whose credentials were used. You then get to decide which risk level is acceptable. So you choose a threshold of low, medium, or high. And then based on that risk level, you choose whether to allow access, automatically block, or even allow access after additional requirements are met. Such as here in the example here, we have require multi-factor authentication or MFA. Alternatively, we have the user risk policy. So here, identity protection learns the user's normal behavioral patterns and then uses this knowledge to calculate the likely risk that the user's identity was compromised. And based on that risk, the admin can then decide whether to allow access, block it, or allow after additional requirements are met. And in this case, our example is showing the control as requiring a password change. So then again, prompting that user to change their password. And then once they do, then they can continue on with their business. Now let's talk about how we can remediate these risks with Microsoft Defender for Office 365. First, I want to take a few moments here to explain Microsoft Defender for Office 365. This is a great service that provides several benefits. The first of which is industry-leading protection. So Defender for Office 365 is leveraging trillions and trillions of signals. Up to 6.5 trillion signals as of the current date from email alone to quickly and accurately detect those threats, protect your users against sophisticated attacks, all of those phishing attacks that we see every day, the zero-day malware and such. So Microsoft Defender for Office 365 is blocking up to 5 billion phishing emails per day in 2018 and analyzing over 300,000 phishing campaigns again in 2018. And we protect millions and millions of unique users from advanced threats. The next benefit that I want to highlight here is actionable insights. These are presented to your security administrators by correlating signals from a broad range of data to help identify, prioritize, and provide recommendations on how to address potential problems. The recommendations include remediation actions and such to help you really proactively secure your organization. Next, I want to talk about automated response. So as you know, investigation and remediation in post-breach scenarios can be difficult, expensive, and most of all, time-consuming. Most organizations lack the resources, lack the expertise, and the time needed for rapid investigation and effective remediation. So Defender for Office 365 is giving you this automated response options that really help your security operators leverage a ton of time saving, money, and resources. So this is huge capabilities and benefits for your organization. Lastly, here I want to highlight training and awareness. So social engineering attacks, such as these phishing attacks that are ever so prevalent, often look legitimate. They're hard to spot for busy users, and that's why they're effective. So it's so critical to train our end users to make the right decisions in the event of an attack. We do this with in-product notifications to help users understand the risks of performing an action, such as, hey, here's what's going to happen if you click on the suspicious link. And other features such as attack simulators help the administrators launch realistic threat simulations to train users to become more aware and more vigilant. The reporting capabilities around users in regards to training and awareness can empower your organization to be more proactive in regards to this, And also there's capabilities for users themselves to notify Microsoft of suspicious content. So it's not just the security professionals that are taking the lead in improving everything. So let's talk a little bit more about these automated investigations. Whenever you're investigating a potential cyber attack, time is of the essence. The sooner you identify and mitigate the threats, the better off your organization will be. So the automated investigation and response, or AIR capabilities, include a set of security playbooks that can be launched automatically, such as when one of these alerts is triggered, or manually if you're doing an investigation and you're in Explorer and you see a view there, you can launch it directly from there. So the automated investigation and response capabilities can save your security operations team a ton of time, a ton of effort whenever it comes to mitigating these threats. They'll be more efficient and more effective. We can even click and deep dive down into the investigation from here. So we'll take a look at this later, but you can see here that if we go deep dive into the link from the alert, we'll go into the Office 365 Threat Intelligence Summary Investigation graph, as we see here in the example. And this graph is going to show us so much detail. So here we see the different entities, emails, users, and the devices that have automatically been investigated as part of this triggered alert. So pretty cool stuff there. Moving on, we'll talk about how to respond to data loss prevention alerts. So one of the key areas when it comes to protecting our assets is really protecting that data. So part of the Defender capabilities include data loss prevention, or DLP. So with a DLP policy, you can identify sensitive information across many locations, such as Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Microsoft Teams. For example, you could identify any document containing a credit card number that's stored in any OneDrive for Business site, or you could monitor just the OneDrive of specific people. You can prevent the accidental sharing of sensitive information. So, for example, you can identify any document or email containing a health record that's shared with people outside of your organization, and then automatically block access to that document or block the email from being sent. You can monitor and protect sensitive information in the desktop versions of Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. Pretty cool. And just like in Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive for Business, these Office desktop programs include the same capabilities to identify sensitive information and apply these data loss prevention policies. So DLP is providing continuous monitoring when people share content in your Office programs. We can help users learn how to stay compliant without interrupting their workflows, educating them about DLP policies and helping them remain compliant without blocking their work. For example, if a user tries to share a document containing sensitive information, then the DLP policy could send them an email notification and show them the policy tip in the context of the document library. And then they can even decide to override the policy if they have business justification. And you can get these same policy tips to appear in Outlook on the web, Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. One other thing that you can do with a DLP policy is view the DLP alerts and then various reports showing all the content that matches your organization's DLP policies. So some pretty good data there for you to consume. Let's talk about some of the components for data loss prevention. So if you've not worked with DLP before, then this is some important concepts to understand as far as the underlying components go. First, we have sensitive information types. A sensitive information type is defined by a pattern that can be identified by a function or regular expression. In addition, corroborative evidence such as keywords and checksums could be used to identify a sensitive information type. Confidence level and proximity are also used in this evaluation process. What's cool is Microsoft 365 compliance comes with built-in sensitive information types like credit card numbers, bank accounts, and tons more. You can also create custom sensitive info types, and these can be matched on, again, regular expressions, it can be keywords, or even an uploaded dictionary. Second, here we have sensitivity labels. So sensitivity labels specify the classification of a document. These could be terms like public, private, or even classified, for example. With these labels, more functionality can be applied to the document, like encryption. And we apply the labels to documents either manually, so an end user herself can do that, or automatically based on the sensitivity info types. With data loss prevention policies, we want to consider a few basic things. The first of which is where to protect the content. So again, these are locations that we've mentioned before with Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for business sites, as well as Microsoft Teams, including the chat and channel messages. We also want to consider in the policy when and how to protect the content by enforcing rules. So these rules can be comprised of conditions where the content must match before the rule is enforced, and then actions that we want the rule to automatically take when the content matching those conditions is found. Finally, the last component that I want to mention here for data loss prevention components comes down to the Cloud App Security File Policy. So the file policies within Cloud App Security can be set to provide compliance scans, legal e-discovery tasks, or data loss prevention for that sensitive content, whether that's shared publicly or not, and many more use cases. So I'd like to take a little bit deeper dive into investigating DLP alerts in Microsoft Cloud App Security. So after a Cloud App Security file policy is created with a DLP related configuration, file policy violation alerts are investigated in the alerts area of Cloud App Security. So we can manage the alerts from here. If we go to the alerts page like we have shown here on the screen, then all we would need to do is select open to get the resolution status. We'll see full visibility into any suspicious activity or violation of the established policies that we have in place. This really helps us safeguard the security posture that's defined for the specific cloud environment. Now, for each of these alerts, you need to investigate and determine the nature of the violation and required response. So we've helped you out here by allowing you to filter the alerts by alert type or severity. So that helps you process the most important ones first. You can select a specific alert. So depending on what type of alert it is, you will see various actions that can be taken before resolving the alert. You can even filter based on the application. So the apps listed here are ones for which there were activities detected by Cloud App Security. And there's actually just 3 different types of violations you'll need to deal with when investigating alerts. The first is serious violations, which require an immediate response. An example might be there's a suspicious activity alert, so you might want to suspend the account until the user changes their password. For a data leak, you might want to restrict permissions or quarantine the file. And then if a new app is discovered, you might want to block access to the service on your proxy or firewall. Secondly, for violations that we want to take into account, we have questionable violations. So these require further investigation as well. You might contact the user or the user's manager about the nature of the activity. Is this legit or not? Or you might even just leave it open here while you wait for more information. The third type of violation that you'll want to look further into is authorized violations or anomalous behavior. So these could result from legitimate use. And so if you know so, then you can simply dismiss the alert. Okay, so now we're going to move on to looking at Azure Defender. So first, let's talk about how to plan for cloud workload protections using Azure Defender. Now I'll take a moment to explain Azure Security Center, give you a brief overview of it, because this is where you access all of the Azure Defender capabilities. Azure Security Center itself is a unified infrastructure security management system. It's about strengthening the security posture of your data centers and providing you some advanced threat protections across your hybrid workloads, whether they're in Azure, other clouds, or on-prem. When we talk about strengthening security posture, we're really talking about identifying those misconfigurations and performing hardening tasks that are recommended as industry security best practices, and then helping you implement them across your machines, data services, and applications. Now, it's a security basic to know and make sure your workloads are secure, but it starts with having a security policy that's tailored to your organization. So we help you manage security policy and compliance with Security Center. We make it easy because Security Center policies are built on top of Azure policy. So you get that full range and flexibility of a policy solution that you're already familiar with. We also provide continuous assessments with Azure Security Center. So we're always discovering any new resources that are being deployed across your workloads, assessing whether they're configured according to security best practices, according to your security policy. And if not, then they're flagged and you get a prioritized list of recommendations for what you need to fix in order to protect your machines and to be compliant. Now, the heart of Azure Security Center's value lies in its recommendations. These recommendations are tailored to the particular security concerns found on your workloads, and Security Center is doing the work of the security admin for you by not only finding the vulnerabilities, but providing you with those specific instructions on how to get rid of them, and even making it even easier with pre-built automated one-click fixes. One of the coolest tools that I find powerful within Security Center is the network map. So this is giving you this cool graph of your resources and how they're connected, and continuously monitoring your network security status. So you can see, again, the whole topology of your workloads. So you can see, is this node properly configured? Is this one able to talk to the internet? Is this one connected to this one? And viewed all within a security context. Finally, what Azure Security Center allows you to do is automatically discover and onboard Azure resources with automatic provisioning. It provides this seamless native integration with Azure and other Azure resources. So what that means is that you can pull together a complete security story involving Azure policy and built-in Security Center policies across all of your Azure resources, and then make sure that the whole thing is automatically applied to newly discovered resources as you create them in Azure. So let's talk about how you access all of this goodness. To enable Azure Defender, you first enable Azure Security Center. So Azure Defender is the cloud workload protection feature of Azure Security Center. We talked about the security posture management. So on one hand, we have the cloud security posture management, and on the other, we have the cloud workload protection platform features. And that's when we talk about Azure Security Center and Azure Defender together. So across that solution, then we're covering those two broad pillars of cloud security. And as a note here, the Cloud Security Posture Management, the CSPM side of Azure Security Center is available at no additional charge to all Azure users. So by nature of having an Azure subscription, it's included. That gets you the continuous assessment and security recommendations and Azure Secure Score for all of your Azure resources. So again, that's detection of security misconfigurations in your Azure machines, gets you asset inventory, the secure score so that you can see at a quick glance what security posture is. And then you can really use these to help strengthen your security posture and then track compliance with your built-in policies for your Azure resources. To enable these for hybrid workloads and then to get to the advanced threat protections and some of the other features, then it does require the Azure Defender to be enabled. So again, this is more on the cloud workload protection side of things with advanced intelligent protections that are catered to Azure and hybrid resources and workloads. You get a whole range of extra security features. So in addition to the built-in policies, when you've enabled any Azure Defender plan, you can also add custom policies and initiatives. So there are various Defender plans for different types of IaaS and PaaS resources, as well as some of the underlying Azure Fabric as well. And then some of the features that you'll get are regulatory compliance dashboards, adaptive application controls and network hardening, just-in-time VM access. So that's all in addition to what you already are getting at no additional cost with the free plan for your Azure resources. So let me explain a little bit more about the cloud workload protections that are available in Azure Defender. Azure Defender for servers adds threat detection and advanced defenses for both your Windows and Linux machines. For Windows, Azure Defender is integrating with Azure services to monitor and protect your Windows-based machines. You will get the alerts and remediation suggestions from all of these services bubbled up into Security Center in a very easy to see and use format. And for our Linux machines, what Azure Defender is doing is collecting audit records using Audit D. So very, very helpful there for both your Windows and Linux machines as far as threat detections and defenses. The threat detection and protection capabilities for servers include a whole list of features. So we touched on some of them briefly when I showed you how to enable it, but let's talk a little more about some of these capabilities that you get when you enable Azure Defender for servers. First, you get a included Defender for Endpoint license. So with an integrated license for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, along with Azure Defender, you're getting this comprehensive endpoint detection and response capabilities. So whenever Defender for Endpoint detects a threat, it triggers an alert. And this alert is shown both in Azure Security Center and the Defender for Endpoint portals. So from the Security Center, you can pivot to the Defender for Endpoint console to perform a more detailed, deeper investigation to really uncover that scope of the attack. Now, just an important note that Defender for Endpoint is automatically enabled on Windows servers that use Security Center. The next feature that I want to highlight here that is a really cool one is a vulnerability assessment. So you have an included vulnerability scanner with Azure Security Center. In this case, we've white labeled Qualys. So it's one of the leading tools for real-time identification of vulnerabilities in Azure and hybrid virtual machines. So really good stuff there. You don't even have to have a separate Qualys license or Qualys account. Everything is handled seamlessly inside Azure Security Center. Another great feature that comes as part of Azure Defender for Servers is just-in-time virtual machine access. So you know that threat actors are actively hunting for accessible machines with open management ports like RDP or SSH. So all of your VMs are potential targets for an attack. And when a VM is successfully compromised, it's often used as the entry point to attack further resources within your environment. That's why we offer just-in-time or JIT VM access to really lock down that inbound traffic to your VMs. It reduces the attack surface area by reducing exposure to the management ports. Essentially what we're doing is allowing you to request access whenever an admin, for example, does need to RDP into a box. So we basically will open up a port and allow you to perform your actions for a set amount of time. So again, just-in-time VM access is included as one of the features as Azure Defender. A couple of the other ones that I'd like to mention are file integrity monitoring, which will check for changes against OS and registry files since the last time they were scanned, adaptive network hardening. So this is great if you're using NSGs or network security groups to filter traffic to and from your resources. But there could be a case where the actual traffic flowing through the NSG is maybe just a subset of the rules. And so there could be opportunities to improve the security posture by hardening the NSG rules based on the actual traffic patterns. So what we do is take a look at, here's the NSG rule, here's the actual traffic flowing in and out of your VM, and then provide you recommendations on how to harden those NSG rules. One other one is Docker host hardening. So if you're running unmanaged containers on Linux VMs or other Linux machines running Docker containers, then Azure Security Center will continuously assess the configuration of those containers and then compare them with CIS Docker benchmarks and provide you alerts and recommendations if they don't satisfy any of the controls. So really good features and benefits included with Azure Defender for Servers for, again, both your Windows and Linux machines. Now I want to talk more about Azure Defender for App Service. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the Azure Defender plans. As we saw, there were quite a few plans based on IaaS or PaaS resources, along with even the Azure Resource Manager. So let's talk a little bit more about Azure Defender for App Service. It's, as you know, if you're using app services, then this is a fully managed platform that we provide. This can be used for building and hosting your web apps and APIs. And that way you don't have to worry about managing the infrastructure. You get the management, the monitoring, and the operational insights that you need for your web apps and APIs. What's great about Azure Security Center is that it's natively integrated with Azure App Service. Therefore, there is no need to deploy and onboard. The integration is completely transparent. To utilize Azure Defender for App Service, then you would need a supported app service plan associated with dedicated machines. And then you would need to also enable Azure Defender for App Services on the subscription where you have the app services living. What's really cool is how we use the scale of the cloud to identify attacks targeting applications specifically running over app services. Attackers are probing web apps to find and exploit weaknesses. And then before being routed to specific environments, we'll see requests to these applications running in Azure to go through several gateways. Then we can inspect them and log them and use this data to identify exploits and attackers and learn new patterns that will be used later. So what you get immediately when you enable Azure Defender for App Service is the continuous assessment of the resources covered by your app service plan, security recommendations that we generate based on the findings that we see in your app service plan. We give you detailed instructions in those recommendations on how to harden your app service resources. Further, we detect multitudes of threats to your app service resources by monitoring several items. A few I'll name off here: the underlying sandboxes and VMs, the requests and responses sent to and from your app service apps, the VM instance in which your app service is running, and its management interface. And lastly, the app service internal logs, which are available thanks to the visibility that Azure has as its cloud provider. So as a native solution, Azure Defender can identify attack methodologies applying to multiple targets. For example, from a single VM host, it would be difficult to identify a distributed attack from a small set of IPs crawling to similar endpoints on multiple hosts. The log data and the infrastructure together, however, can tell the story. So from a new attack circulating in the wild to compromises in customer machines, so therefore Security Center can be the central point of notification of detecting these ongoing attacks across your environments. For app services, Azure Defender can detect numerous attacks. I'll mention a few here. So we're looking for threats by MITRE attack tactics. Certainly the complete list from pre-attack to command and control. When we talk about the pre-attack threats, we can detect the execution of multiple types of vulnerability scanners that attackers frequently use to probe apps for weaknesses. We can detect those initial access threats with Microsoft Threat Intelligence powering the alerts that trigger when a known malicious IP address connects to your Azure App Service FTP interface, for example. Also, execution threats. Defender is detecting attempts to run high privilege commands, Linux commands on Windows App Service, fileless attack behavior, digital currency mining tools, and a ton of other suspicious and malicious code execution activities. And lastly, I'll mention here dangling DNS detection. The Defender for App Service plan is awesome because it's identifying any DNS entries remaining in your DNS registrar when an app service website is decommissioned. There's a real problem with dangling DNS and attackers being able to utilize these. So if you find that you've removed a website and someone didn't remove its custom domain from DNS, then we have an entry in DNS pointing to a non-existing resource which leaves our subdomain vulnerable to takeover. So Azure Defender is helping you identify whenever you have any DNS entries remaining without an app service website. Really good for helping prevent some attacks there. Now I want to mention one other Azure Defender plan, which is the Azure Defender for Storage. This helps detect unusual and potentially harmful attempts to access or exploit your storage accounts. It's utilizing a lot of the advanced capabilities that we have built in around our Microsoft Threat Intelligence and Security AI, giving you a ton of contextual security alerts and recommendations. So there's several reasons when we might trigger an alert when it comes to storage. So this is whenever we see anomalies around access patterns to storage accounts, for example. We can integrate these directly with emails or other notification aspects. They'll show up in Azure Security Center with all the details of suspicious activity and then those recommendations on how to investigate and remediate. So the three types of storage that are currently covered by Azure Defender for Storage are blob storage, Azure Files, and Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, so ADLS Gen 2. With the native security that you get by virtue of the storage being in Azure and being protected by an Azure plan, then you simply enable the Azure Defender for Storage plan within Azure Security Center that we saw earlier. And then your Defender for Storage is going to protect your data automatically. And again, that's in your Blob, Azure Files, and Data Lakes. It's giving you that centralized security across all your data assets managed by Azure. And it's integrated actually with our other Azure security services, such as Azure Sentinel. You get a whole rich detection suite powered by Microsoft Threat Intelligence. So these detections in Defender for Storage cover the top storage threats, such as anonymous access, compromised credentials, social engineering, privilege abuse, and malicious content. Because it's automated, it does make it easier to prevent and respond to identified threats, really give you that response at scale. When might you get a security alert? So let's take a look at this graph. So as I said, we enable it. We saw how you do that in the pricing and setting as Azure Security Center. So it's one-click enablement. We can cover blobs, files, data lakes. We have an attacker trying to go after them. So we'll get an alert enriched with all of that threat intelligence that we have access to. Maybe we see suspicious access patterns. So someone's accessed our storage account from a Tor exit node or from an IP considered suspicious by our Microsoft Threat Intelligence. Perhaps we're seeing other suspicious activities like, this is a large amount, an unusual amount, or an anomalous data extraction or change of access permissions. We can even trigger on upload of malicious content. So if we see some potentially malware infected files, and this is based on hash reputation analysis, or if we see hosting of phishing content, then we'll get alerts that our security teams can act on. We can, again, these are available within Azure Security Center. We can export them to other systems. We have options of continuous export to put them into Azure Sentinel or any other third-party SIEM tool or any other tool that you need, such as your ticketing system. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit more about Azure Defender plans and when we might get alerts, let's talk about how we remediate these security alerts using Azure Defender. So I'll just take a moment here to explain security alerts in the context of Azure Security Center and Azure Defender. In Azure Security Center, there are various alerts for many different resource types. Security Center generates alerts for resources deployed on Azure and for resources deployed on-prem and in hybrid cloud environments. These alerts are triggered by advanced detections and, again, are available when you enable the Azure Defender plans. The alerts themselves are notifications that Azure Security Center is generating when it detects threats on your resources, and then these are prioritized in a list along with information that you'll need to quickly investigate the problem. You might even just be viewing these alerts within your SIEM tool, such as Azure Sentinel. We'll also provide you with recommendations on how to remediate an attack. So again, in Azure Security Center, we use this same concept of a security incident being a collection of related alerts instead of listing each alert individually. We're using Cloud Smart Alert correlation to correlate all these different alerts and low fidelity incidents signals into security incidents. The way that Security Center is detecting threats and reducing the false positives and lowering that alert noise for you is we're collecting, analyzing, and integrating log data from all your Azure resources and from the network. We can also work with connected solutions, so connected partner solutions like firewall and endpoint protection solutions. Then we can analyze that information, and Security Center will often correlate information from multiple sources to identify those threats. Then Security Center assigns a severity to the alerts to help you prioritize the order in which you should address each one. So if a resource is compromised, you know which ones to get to right away. And the severity is based on how confident Azure Security Center is in the finding or the analytic used to issue the alert, and the confidence level that there was malicious intent behind the activity that led to the alert. The way that Security Center benefits security research and your data science teams and your own analysts is through continuous monitoring assessments. So we're constantly, again, internally using our own tools and teams to look for changes out in the threat landscape and then update our products and services such as Security Center and Defender so that you get that continuous monitoring is always updated with the latest and greatest intel. Now, there are a lot of alert types. There is a great reference list containing over 500 types of alerts that we have documented. I use this document all the time. It's called Security Alerts Reference Guide, and this is available on the internet. And it's going to give you a list of each alert type, a description, a severity, and where it falls in the MITRE attack tactics. So really good stuff there. Now that we've talked a little bit more about what security alerts are and how they work in Azure Security Center and Azure Defender, I'd like to talk about how we remediate these alerts in Azure Defender. So whenever you are in the Azure Defender Security Center portal, you will receive, again, this actionable list of tasks to mitigate the threat, prevent future attacks, trigger automated responses, and even suppress similar alerts. So whenever you access the security alert page, you'll see high-level information about the security alert. This is going to include, as you can see here, the title, the severity, the status, the activity time, a description of the suspicious activity, and which resource or resources were affected. Alongside the affected resource are the Azure tags if you have them. So the tags that are relevant to that resource will be listed. And you can, use these to infer the organizational context of the resource when investigating the alert. In large organizations, it might be, very difficult to know which resource is used for which business purpose and to whom or which app it belongs. On the right side of the alert page, then we're getting the details. So we have alert details tab and the take action tab so if we want to see more details to help investigate the issue, we're going to get info like IP addresses, the files, the processes, and more. And then under the take action tab, we can use this to take further actions on this security alert, whether this is to mitigate the threat, which will provide us manual remediation steps for the security alert. We may get information on how to prevent future attacks with security recommendations that help reduce the attack surface, which in turn increases our security posture and thus helps us prevent future attacks. We have the option here to also trigger automated response. So we have very great tight integration with Azure Logic apps. So it makes it super easy to trigger a Logic app as a set of automated actions in response to a security alert. And lastly here, you can suppress similar alerts. So this provides you the option to suppress future alerts with very similar characteristics if you don't think this alert is relevant for your organization at this time. So now it's time for us to take a look at how to mitigate these threats using Azure Defender. We've covered how the incidents and alerting work, how to remediate them. So we're going to go take a look at some of these alerts and how to remediate them. So I'll be going over into my demo environment now. Let's take a look at how to remediate alerts within Azure Defender. So this is the Azure Security Center overview page. Let's take a look at first how to enable Azure Defender. Under Management, I'm going to Pricing and Settings, clicking on the subscription for which I want to enable Azure Defender. So as we looked at in the course, this is the page where we can toggle Azure Defender off, which covers our Azure resources only with secure score and continuum assessment and recommendations. And then we can toggle it to Azure Defender on, where we have our various Azure Defender plans. So we talked in depth about Azure Defender for servers and touched on Azure Defender for app service along with Azure Defender for storage. So now I'm going to just go over here to the Azure Defender dashboard. So within the Security Center main page, I'm going to the Azure Defender blade. So this dashboard is actually the entry point for your Azure Defender plans, which resources you have covered. You can see at a quick glance your most prevalent security alerts, which resources are most often attacked, and which VMs have high severity vulnerabilities. Touching on some of the topics we talked about in the course, we have some of the Azure Defender capabilities and features such as just-in-time access, file integrity monitoring, adaptive application control, adaptive network hardening, and network maps. So I mentioned this and talked about how it gives you a whole topology of your discovered resources. You can see which VMs are allowed to talk to which VMs, and within a security context, able to see, hey, which ones have alerts and recommendations, and what is the actual allowed traffic based on my NSGs here from VM to VM. So, this helps in the case of really ensuring that you have machines or workloads isolated from the internet, or looking for where there might be opportunities for lateral movement for the attackers. So really cool stuff there that can be used as part of your Azure Defender for servers. The security alerts here, we have a graph here that shows, hey, here's which ones are high, medium, and low. So I can just click right on here to pivot to the alerts dashboard, or go to it directly from the Security Center main page. So whenever I pull up the alerts, we'll have a filterable list where we'll start taking a look at some of these and how to remediate them. So I'll just click on any one of these alerts. And in this case, I'm going to click on View Full Details so that we can see this screen all at once. So I clicked on Malicious Credential Theft Tool Execution Detected. So you can see here we have the severity, the status, is it active or is it dismissed? When did the activity occur? We have a description of what the alert is, what it's, why we're being alerted. So in this case, we saw that a known credential theft tool execution command line was detected. So it was either the process itself or the command line that indicated an intent to dump the user's credentials, keys, plain text passwords, and more. We see the affected resource here from a business context, right? So which VM, which subscription it was in, and then those tags that we talked about that can help us in our investigations. We see which MITRE ATT&CK tactics are at use, so credential access here. Then we get additional details depending on the alert and the alert type and what we were able to discover. You'll see different information here on the details tab. But in this case, it gives you, you can pivot directly into Defender ATP portal from here. We have the domain. We have the tenant ID, which file name caused this alert. So we have the Mimikatz, the machine name, and then the actual file and host objects here. Next, we can click on the Next Take Action tab, either by clicking up here or clicking on Take Action down here. So this is where we can actually mitigate the threat. So in this case, we've been given several steps for manual remediation on how to counter this tool. So we want to make sure the machine is completely updated. For example, we could install and run the malicious software removal tool and such. Then we can also pivot, which is a really cool feature here, is go directly to the other alerts on the affected resource. So what's been going on with this VM? It really is a victim VM because we have 106 more alerts on this affected resource. Then we're given actual steps that we can take to help prevent future attacks. So these top security recommendations for this resource, telling us, hey, if you put these items in place, then your machine will be safer from this type of attack again. So stuff like applying disk encryption on the VMs or putting an endpoint protection solution on the VM can help us with malicious credential theft exploits. Again, we have some security recommendations here. We can view all 6 of them that can help us increase our security posture. In the case of, we know exactly what we want to do, so maybe we've already built out an automated response in Azure Logic Apps, or we want to go see what the suggested responses in the community GitHub are. We can trigger that Logic app right from here. And then if we decide this is something that we don't care about, maybe we're testing, maybe this isn't an alert that really matters to us, then we can create a suppression rule here to quiet those down and keep our SOC analysts free to worry about other alerts. So let's take a look at some other alerts that we can mitigate and remediate. So since we talked about Azure storage, let's take a look at some specific to storage. Here's one that I mentioned, access from a Tor exit node to a storage account. So this is going to alert us when we see something accessing our Azure storage accounts from suspicious IP address that's associated as an active Tor exit node. So again, we get the severity, the status, the activity time, which resources were affected, where we're at on the MITRE attack tactics. So here we're in pre-attack. Get some additional details. So we can see this is a different type of alert. So we have different types of details given. In this case, we get the client IP address, where the client is located in the Azure Data Center East US region, which operations types were applicable to this. So this is a get blob. Oh, we see that the authentication type was anonymous and that they were going with a dummy user agent against our Azure blobs. Even when the slice start time, the pipeline name, and the container. This time we'll see what actions we have. So again, here's the manual steps on how to mitigate the threat, the other alerts for this same resource, and the ability to trigger automated responses with logic apps and suppress similar alerts. So very good actionable data here in regards to this accessing our storage accounts from a known Tor node. So we see some other types here as examples. So unusual amount of data extracted from a storage account, access from an unusual locations to a storage file share, unusual change of access permission in a storage account. So we can take a look at these details as well, just to see some others. So here we see on the MITRE attack tactics that they're using persistence. We have investigation steps to confirm whether the storage container permissions change was performed for a legitimate reason or not. The why we might have received this alert. Maybe the permissions were changed in an unusual way because an attacker has changed container permissions to weaken its security, or a legitimate user did for whatever reason. We have the storage container access, the container. Was the request status successful or not? Yes, in this case it was. And then again, the mitigation steps themselves are listed out here for us to take action on. So going back to the main security page, I wanted to show one other method of getting to the security alert. So that's here versus from the Azure Defender panel. So I just am going to take a look. So if our storage has been affected, then we might want to check out our SQL as well. So as a sample alert here for SQL, we see a potential SQL brute force attempt. So this is a very common attack, as you know. So I wanted to highlight some of these details that we get. We will get the IP location. So if we want to use that in geofencing or blocking specific regions or IP ranges, we see which of our data centers was affected. We see recommendations on what to do, ensuring the use of strong passwords. Were there any failed logins in regards to this brute force attack? And then again, here we have this detailed info on the client IP for use in our threat hunting and actions that we take afterwards. We have some very easy mitigation steps here by going to the firewall settings to lock down the firewall as tightly as possible in the case of this potential SQL brute force attack. As you can see, there's many Types of alerts, again, we have documented over 500 types of alerts based on the various different resources that Azure Defender protects. We get detailed information about the alert itself, why we alerted on it, which resources are affected, and how to mitigate those steps. And one final note here is that, as mentioned, many of these alerts are exported out to your SIM tool for further threat hunting. Again, they're very, very detailed and high fidelity based on the Azure integration. So that's it for looking at Azure Defender security alerts and talking about how to remediate them. This concludes Module 2. We covered a lot of ground, including how to mitigate incidents using Microsoft 365 Defender, how to protect your identities. We also learned how to respond to data loss prevention alerts, and we talked about how to use Azure Defender for cloud workload protections, and finally, how to remediate those security alerts using Azure Defender. So next is Module 3, Capabilities of Microsoft Security Solutions for Azure, where you'll continue with my colleague Matt Egan. But first, we'll take a quick 10-minute break.
Welcome back from the break. My name is Matt Egan. I'm a global black belt in the security solutions area here at Microsoft, and I'm going to be taking you through Module 3, creating queries for Azure Sentinel using Kusto. Let's get started with Module 3. A KQL query is a read-only request to process data and return results. The request is stated in plain text using a data flow model designed to make the syntax easy to read, write, and automate. The query uses schema entities organized in a hierarchy similar to SQL's, databases, tables, and columns. It is essential to understand how the results flow through the pipe. That's that little pipe character there on the screen. Everything on the left side of the pipe is processed, then passed to the right side of the pipe. The query consists of a sequence of query statements. At least one statement is a tabular expression statement that produces data arranged in a table-like mesh of columns and rows. The query's tabular expression statements produce the results of the query. The tabular expression statement syntax has tabular data flow from one tabular query operator to another, starting with the data source and then flowing through a set of data transformation operators bound together through the use of the pipe delimiter. For example, the Kusto query on this side has a single statement, which is a tabular expression. The statement starts with a table called security event. The event ID column value then filters the data, or rows, for that table, and then summarizes the result by creating a new column for the count by account. Next, in the prepare phase, the results are then limited to 10 rows. Let statements bind names to expressions. For the rest of the scope, where the let statement appears, the name refers to its bound value. Let statements improve modularity and reuse since they allow you to break out a potentially complex expression into multiple parts. Each part is bound to a name through the let statement, and together they compose the whole. The let statement allows for the creation of user-defined functions and views. The views are expressions whose results look like a new table. The let statement allows for the creating variables to be used in later statements. In this example, time offset and discarded event ID are created and used as part of the security event where clause. The let statement allows for the creation of dynamic tables or lists. The where operator filters a table to the subset of rows that satisfy a predicate. So in this example, you can see that we're saying, I want to see everything in the security event table where time generated is greater than ago 1 day, or where the time generated was greater than ago 1 hour, and the event ID is equal to 4624. So you use the where operator to filter your statements to a subset of rows. The extend operator creates a calculated column and appends those new columns to the result set. So let's take a look at this example here. The query on this slide is an Azure Sentinel detection rule. First, the use of let is used to define the time frame variable, which is going to make this very maintainable and readable. The second let statement is a dynamic list of variables that we can then hunt against inside of the body of our main query. So third, the use of the extend keyword is to create two new columns, the HTTP status code, as well as the domain, which are being filled as the result of the extract function that is being used. The result set's progression via the pipe statement allows us to use the newly created columns as filters. So let's find out about how to use the order by operator. In this statement here, what we have is a search through the security alert table. We're filtering it using the where clause. We're extending the result set using the extend statement and creating a case for the severity order. And then what we're doing is we're ordering the results by that severity order in a descending manner. You can use the order by operator to utilize any column or multiple columns by simply using a comma separator. And each column can be set up to be descending or ascending. We can also use project operators. The project operators control what columns to include, add, remove, or rename in the result set of a statement. There are multiple types of project operators, and the table here is describing a list of the different variations. Project, for example, will select specific columns to include at the exclusion of all others. The project away will tell us specifically which columns we want to exclude from the result set, but leave the others in place. Project keep tells us which ones to keep from the input. And then project rename allows us to say which columns to keep, but to rename them in the output. And then finally, project reorder sets the column order in the resulting output itself. Let's see how we can analyze query results using KQL. One of the things that we can do is we can use the summarize operator. The summarize operator allows us to take a calculated result for specified fields inside of a query. So in this statement here, we're using a Sentinel rule to do a summarized count by process and computer. This is going to give us a count of how many records are inside of our result set, and then create a matrix of those by the process and by the computer name. In the second part, what we're saying is we have a time frame of 1 day. We're then going to go look in our sign-in logs, add some where clause filters to it, and then we are going to create a summarization of that using a D count. A D count is an estimate for the number of distinct values that have been taken by that expression in the summary group. So if I have maybe 15 different names, I would get 15 rows for that, if those were the 15 distinct names. Otherwise, if I had maybe hundreds of rows, but only 15 distinct names, I'd only get those 15 distinct names back. There are a number of different expressions that can be used in the summarize event. We can have count, decount, do an average if, max if, minimums, summaries. So there's a number of them there, and we want to go ahead and explore all those when we are using a summary. We can also use the KQL queries to do a visualization. Visualizations can be rendered from the results in line, and we can count up our results rather than getting just a simple text output for them, when instead what we'll get is an actual graphical representation. So in this first one, for example, we're doing again a summarized count by account, but then we're going to render a bar chart. The second one is doing, again, a summarized count, but this one's using a special case, which is a bin of the time generated. Bin allows us to take time values and put them into individual small buckets. So in this case, we're putting them into 1-day buckets, and thus we will get a count of everything that's inside of the security event table, but broken out into 1-day counts rather than one large number. And then we're using a special chart, which is a time chart, to render that information across that time series. Building multiple table statements using KQL. Reading the data from just one table isn't always going to be very useful for us. We want to sometimes look at data that's coming across from multiple tables, and that's where we can start to use different types of joins between the system. Now, this here is what we're going to be calling a union operator. The union operator takes 2 or more tables and returns the rows of all of them. In this case, I'm looking at the first one is security events, and I'm unioning it with security alerts. That means I'm going to get all of the events from the security event table and all of the events from the security alert table, and the two will just be presented in line as one data set. In the second section, I'm doing a union of all tables named security, and then I'm doing a summarized count of those, but breaking them out by the type value. The type value is just telling me which particular table those results came from. We can also do multi-table queries by using the join operator. The join operator merges the rows of 2 tables to form a new table by matching the specified column values from each table. In this case, we are doing a join between the security event table and the security event table. You can join to any table. The system will then match them based on the specified column's value. So it could be based on an IP address or on an account. Anything wherein the 2 columns actually can be used as a key between those 2 tables. How to work with string data using KQL statements. So we can manipulate string data by using functions such as extract. Extract gets a match for a regular expression from a text string, and you have the option to convert the extracted substring to the indicated type. The following example here uses the extract function to pull out the account name from the account field of the security event table using a regular expression. So let's see what it's like to actually write some queries inside of KQL. What we're going to start off with is we're going to take a look at the security events table. And you'll notice that as I start typing, the system actually prompts me with IntelliSense because it knows where I am and it's making suggestions on what it might be that I need to do to complete this particular query. So it knows that, for example, if I'm typing security and security event, I'm either going for the security event table or maybe the SQL security audit events. In this case, I'm looking at security event. And if I hit tab, I can automatically complete that particular statement. Now, I can just run this query as it is by going ahead and clicking on the Run button, and it will then go into the table, get back the result set that I want, and allow me to start interacting with the results that I have inside of the system. So you can see that we have the results of our query here. It's showing us all the different columns that we asked for. If I want to see this data in a more vertical layout rather than a horizontal layout, I can click the caret here, and that will actually show me the results inside of the table. Now, let's go ahead and build some basic KQL queries on top of that. In addition to writing, just say, a security event, we can actually go ahead and add in some of those same features that we were just talking about a little while ago. So let's put in a let statement, and let's go ahead and put in maybe a time offset, and we'll say that this one is going to be equal to 7 days. One thing to note, when we make a statement inside of KQL and we want to end that statement, we end it with a semicolon. Otherwise, the system will consider it to be part of the next statement that's down the line there. So we always want to make sure that we end that with a semicolon. So we're going to use the time set value. We're going to go ahead and create a discard event ID. And this is just going to be ones that we're going to ignore in our particular query. So I'm going to say, let's ignore 4668s. And then let's go back into our security event. Once again, we get the IntelliSense prompt telling us that we could use that table. And then we'll go ahead and put in a little query filter here to filter the time generated down to our time offset. So we're going to say where it was greater than ago. Let's do some interesting things here. Let's do the time offset, and let's multiply that by 2. So that's going to be over the next 14 days rather than over the last 7 days. Now, one thing to note, these are case sensitive. So when I typed in time offset here and I used a lowercase o, the system actually didn't like that, and it's prompting me and saying that that actually doesn't refer to anything that it knows about. So I can then just go back, fix that. It'll correct the error for me and let me know that I can move forward. And let's go ahead and say time generated again here is less than ago and time offset again. And then let's go ahead and put our other where clause in there to filter out our event discard that we don't want. So I'm going to say the event ID. So we'll select that one from the list. And we'll say it's not equal to and our discarded event ID. Now, if I let this one go ahead and run, we should get back our results that are greater than 14 days ago and less than 7 days ago inside of the result set. There we are. So we can see that we have a number of results that actually meet that criteria. Now let's go ahead and actually build out the same sort of query, but maybe let's change this a little bit. Instead of looking at things over a particular time frame, let's go ahead and change this to instead use a dynamic list and look for some suspicious accounts in the system. So let me go ahead and just clean that one out. We'll create another let statement for our value that we want to use, and then we're going to create a variable called suspicious accounts. And what we're going to do here is create a data table. The data table itself is just a schema and value set that we've defined. And we're going to define this one as actually having an account, a field called account, and it then has a value type of string. Then what we can do is define what actually goes into that particular table. So at this point, we're going to use a string literal. So we're going to mark this as a literal string and say that we're looking for the word administrator or / administrator rather. And then we'll also go ahead and look for another string literal of NT authority. quote in the wrong place there. So we're going to then look for NT authority and /system. And we will go ahead and close that one off. Because it is a let statement, we need to make sure that we use that semicolon again. And let's go ahead and use that data table now in our query. So we'll look in security event again. And what we're going to do is now say where the account, we're going to use a special function here or filter called an in statement. And in is going to allow us to look for a value that's inside of this data table that we just created. So we're going to say where it's inside of suspicious accounts. And it would probably help if I did that correctly and actually wrapped it inside of quotes or parentheses. There we go. So now if we run this, we'll see if there's anybody who's trying to log in as administrator or trying to log in as NT authority system during our time frame. And there we go. So we actually see that we again have some results where these are matching inside of our query. Now, there's some other ones that we can do as well. We can be more generic in our searches. We can actually do a search across everything inside of the environment using a couple of very interesting keywords. Let me change this, just look over the last hour. And let's do a search for a value inside of the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search and look for the word ERR anywhere across the entire batch of data that we've got. Now, this is one that could possibly take a while because it is searching across a number of different tables. It's not just going to be my security events, but it's literally every table that I can have access to in the system. So I'm seeing things in here for my insight metrics. I could see things from security events. I could see them from other ones. So search is good if I'm looking for a particular variable or value from somewhere in the system, but I don't know where it is. But this way I can find that data and then I can start to build off of that and build a more specific query targeting exactly what I'm looking for. Let's go ahead and build off of this a little bit more and touch on some of the other things we talked about before, which would be like rendering data. We talked about how we can actually go ahead and create a visualization of the data inside the environment. So if we take, say, for example, our security event table, and we're going to do a summarize, we're going to do a count of that data, and we're going to break that out by account. So this would give us, just if we run it by itself, it'll give us a total number of each times these different accounts appeared inside of the record set. It's a nice thing. It does give us good data. It's interesting. But maybe what we want to do is go ahead and render this, and we'll render it as a bar chart so we can more quickly visualize the data and see that this particular account has quite a few more logins going on. This NT authority system has a few more logins going on than anyone else inside of the system. Now, I mentioned earlier before about the time chart, for example, and how we can use that using the bin statement. What we can do here is we can actually take that same concept here, and we'll take the bin statement. That's the one that takes the different time variables and puts them into little buckets for us. And we can actually go back and say, hey, I want to look at everything binned out over the last 7 days and put it into 1-day buckets that are here. And then we're just going to go ahead and render this as a time chart. And what we're going to see here is just a representation of what the logon traffic looked like inside of the security event table, or sorry, what the security events look like on a day-by-day basis for the records inside of the system. So this concludes part 1 of our session. Let's recap all the content that you've seen so far. In Module 1, we learned how to mitigate threats using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. In Module 2, we learned how to mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender and Azure Defender. And then in Module 3, we learned how to create queries for Azure Sentinel using Kusto. Thank you for your attendance so far, and we look forward to seeing you next time for part 2 of this Microsoft Security Virtual Training Day, Modernize Security and Defend Against Threats event.